Hi, I'm Tim Cook, and this is video 4 of the training program on business planning in marine protected areas, organized by MedPAN, Brijuni National Park, and BlueSeeds. In the previous video, we explored ways to reduce the costs of management of our MPA and rethink its revenues. Here, we will discuss the general approach of searching for and choosing appropriate new financing mechanisms. Okay, so you've now used the business plan tool to calculate your financing gap, and noticing that it was positive, you've tried to fill this gap by reducing the costs of management of your MPA or by reviewing and rethinking your revenues. However, after doing this, your financing gap might still be positive. So it's now time to perhaps think about finding new financial sources. And this is not just to reduce the financing gap of your MPA, but it's essential to do also to diversify the revenue portfolio of your MPA, something which is essential for the financial stability of a marine protected area. So how do I identify the most appropriate financing mechanisms for my marine protected area? Well, it can be useful to follow 5 steps. First step, identify the goods and services provided by your protected area and their economic value. Second step, identify the beneficiaries of those goods or services. Step 3, assess beneficiaries' willingness to pay. Fourth step, identify the available financing options. And step 5, estimate the potential revenues provided by those financing options. Step 1, identify the products of the MPA's ecosystem services and their use to financial planning. There are obviously many services to a marine protected area. They go from carbon storage in underwater meadows, eelgrass meadows, for example, to wave attenuation or coastal buffering, even to water filtration. These MPAs often carry cultural heritage. There are employment opportunities, obviously, in marine protected areas associated sometimes to subsistence fishing or commercial fishing. There are opportunities for recreation and enjoyment, and also for tourism, and naturally there are services linked to habitat and biodiversity protection. A way to categorize the benefits of AMPA is to split them into 2 categories, use benefits on one hand and non-use benefits. In use benefits, direct use values of AMPA derive from the actual direct use of the MPA for such activities as recreation, tourism, harvesting, fishing, or educational services. Indirect use values derive from the goods and services not directly provided by visits to the MPA. For example, ecological functions such as watershed protection, the provision of breeding or feeding habitat, climate stabilization, and nutrient cycling. Finally, option benefits refer to the potential for individuals or the society to use the MPA in the future. For example, many people value a particular protected area even though they have never visited the park, but feel that they might do so in the future. Now, in non-use benefits, bequest benefits relate to knowing that others, for example, your children or grandchildren, can benefit or will benefit from the goods and services provided by the MPA in the future. Finally, existence benefits relate to knowing that the MPA exists and provides valuable goods and services. So even if they don't plan in ever visiting a particular marine protected area, many people attach value to the mere existence of such sites. The second step to choosing an appropriate financing mechanism is to identify the beneficiaries of those MPA ecosystem services to assess the contribution of different stakeholders to MPA financing. So it's important to understand the nature of goods and services provided by the MPA. A public good, for example, once it is provided, is available to everyone. Examples of public goods generated by protected areas are watershed protection, for example, or carbon sequestration or critical habitat protection, and these are associated to public funding. Private goods, once they have been provided to someone, are only available to that individuals. Examples include fishing quotas, so this is associated to private funding. Finally, common goods. In common goods, access is open to anyone, but once they have been used, no one else can use them. For example, harvesting seashells for personal use in a protected area could be open to all, but once they are harvested, no one else can use them than the person who has harvested them. Choosing an appropriate financing mechanism, step 3. Step 3, assess beneficiaries' willingness to pay, depending on the identified type of goods and associated financing contributors. Typically, this will necessitate a study, some survey, for example. Tourism activities, for example, a case study in Croatia in the Brijuni MPA, where 80% of tourists were willing to pay more for the conservation of marine resources, meaning 6 to 10% more than their average daily expenses, and this resulted in an income of 2.4 to 9.9 million euros per year. Identifying appropriate financing mechanisms, step 4. You need to identify all available mechanisms of financing linked to those beneficiaries and goods. So, for example, tourism, well, you can set up entry and use fees. These are relevant for sites with high tourism potential. However, the presence of tourists can threaten the conservation of the site if adequate infrastructure is not put in place, and revenues may vary greatly with the attendance, of course, but also with the season of the year. With tourism, there are tourism operators. Here you can set up licenses and permits to run operations inside the MPA, and they have the potential to complement entry fees. For polluters and illegal users of the MPA, or poachers, fines can be set up. However, they require sufficient means of control and a robust regulatory environment. And you will also need to identify the feasibility of implementing those identified mechanisms. For example, MPA funding must take into account the legal framework in which it operates, so some sources of income are excluded from the start, for example, from income from the sale of objects, if the legal framework of the MPA does not allow it or does not plan to develop certain activities like commercial activities, for example. Step 5, to choosing the appropriate financing mechanism, you have to estimate the potential revenues provided by your selected mechanisms. And to achieve this, you have to carry out a financial feasibility study to assess the real potential of your identified funding mechanism, and you must provide recommendations and actions to launch the implementation of these mechanisms. Thanks for your attention. We've discussed here the framework behind searching for new financing mechanisms. In the next and last video, we will focus on 2 examples of self-generated financing. See you soon.